All right, let's get this show on the road. Okay. The cost of AI, navigating demand versus supply. So here we are in the midst of week 2 of Information Week's series on the cost of AI. And our team has covered many facets of needs associated with delivering AI. And this video features 4 separate interviews on issues of supply and demand when it comes to the technology, the people needed to drive it, and other resources required to support it. Many organizations want to explore ways they can use AI. There are incredible ideas that they believe that could elevate their operations. But the problem is possibly they can't move forward on those plans because the resources they need are not always available. And that can mean not having access to the most popular tech. We'll get into what actually is popular tech. Shortage of AI gurus and whether or not we need AI gurus, or we'll get into the idea of expertise in this field, or there's just not enough literal energy to support some of their ambitions. And that's definitely something that we've been discussing with a number of stories that we've been covering. This does not necessarily mean that companies must give up on AI. This just might mean they need to get real about supply and demand. What follows are interviews with experts from Honeycomb, Efficient Computer, Computer Exchange, and Aarki. So in this first interview with Liz Fong-Jones, Field CTO for Honeycomb, we discussed a variety of elements in AI planning, such as personnel expertise, the importance of data, and being careful to not overbuy or underbuy when it comes to technology and resources. Because right-sizing plans for comparable quality without chasing the priciest options could make the difference in a time of limited supply and high demand. So Liz, many organizations are in the midst of trying to proceed forward to get their AI plans in place. Many of them, some of them might even have great ambitious plans to move forward with something that they think is going to be delivering great efficiency and take them to their next level of competitiveness. But what happens when they run into the potentiality of the resources that they need, whether it's personnel or the technology itself or other aspects of it? They hit a wall and they say, wow, that we actually can't get access to all the things that we need to move forward. What are some considerations that they might take within their organization? What are their alternatives that they might even start to look to kind of like maybe even rethink or try to find a way to move forward?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 categories that this comes under, and I think you named them very aptly, right? Like personnel, how many data and AI experts do you have? Do you have the right set of people to deploy to work on and launch your features? Secondly, data. Do you have access to the right data in order to train, in order to generate insights? And then third and finally, do you have the place to run the models? Do you have a place to run the training? And I think that those 3 things, if you have a shortage in any one of them, it's going to bottleneck and slow down your organization. That being said, I want to disclose I am not an expert in the people side of AI. I am a intermediate person in the area of data. I've certainly worked in data a lot, but I've worked very closely with partners on that one. But the thing that I know best is cloud capacity planning. And I think there are a lot of lessons that we can take from non-AI capacity planning that also broadly apply to AI projects as well.
Gotcha. Do you have some potential examples of mine they can frame this with?
Yeah, so I think the thing that you can do first and foremost is to figure out how many resources am I going to need? Do I want to rely upon a third-party provider such as OpenAI to run the model for me and pre-trained and then to query their service, or do I want to have control over where the model runs, right? That's kind of the first decision that you need to make. If you are relying on OpenAI, I think that is a place where you are then delegating that capacity planning to them. But if you are not one of their most important customers, right, like maybe you're a rounding error, maybe that's fine, but maybe there's a chance that your requests get load shed, and in the event of an overload, which has happened in the past couple of months. In the case that you're running things on your own infrastructure, right, whether you're using Amazon Bedrock, whether you're using GCP's access to machine learning as a service, right, like I think that is a place where you have to reserve the capacity that you intend to use, because there's such a shortage of GPUs, because people are constantly buying out the stock, right? Like you kind of have to say, okay, what's my baseline level? How can I protect that? If I have the ability to go up, if I have the ability to spike beyond that capacity, great, I'll use it. But if I don't have access to that capacity, what am I going to do to gracefully degrade service, right? Like, is there something that I can do to make sure that there is a satisfactory user experience that's maybe less optimal than we would like, but is not serving errors, right? Like I think that's kind of the lessons that we can take from reliability engineering, is doing things to protect our capacity that we do have a guarantee on, and then opportunistically use what we can. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, it's that, right? Like, you have to know what is the capacity you have available, what do you forecast you're going to need. Do not overbuy, do not underbuy, right? Like buy just the right amount, and then take advantage of what you have.
Gotcha. You mentioned overbuy or underbuying. Yeah, that's with most technology. It does come down to money. Are we seeing the way that organizations might look at, or should they be looking at it, like you're even talking about, like comparable to the way that they might be trying to budget their ambitions for cloud, for other resources, as opposed to saying that's the hottest AI resource out there, we need that because that's number one in theory.
Not every project requires the newest and greatest AI models. Not every project requires the newest and greatest underlying hardware, right? And I think we've seen this differentiation in the space, right? Like, there's the Dash Mini models, there's the Dash Turbo models, right? Like, so certainly it's the case that, you can upgrade generation of model and then also downsize, right? Like going from full GPT 3.5 to going to, 4 Lite, right? Like those are things that you can do in order to maintain the comparable quality of results, right? Like, you'll see these analyses by OpenAI, by Anthropic, right? Like they're showing this is how the previous generation of models compares to the latest generation of models. And if you're satisfied with the performance of the previous generation and you just want to break on price, right? Go down a size of model while using the latest generation, right? So I think, and then this is constantly evolving, right? Like this week I was reading about the new DeepSeek research out of China, right? Like, and I think that represents the fact that, this is a rapidly evolving field, and it very well may be that model training is a commodity rather than something that you are paying an extremely large price for because it incurs, billions of dollars of spending. We don't know yet, but I do think that we have to look at for the lifetime of your feature, right? Like, maybe committing and saying, I'm going to allocate this amount of money to use this amount of hardware. Especially if you're using something like Amazon Bedrock, then you can say, right, like, I'm allocating this amount of Bedrock capacity and I'm going to run whatever model I feel is most appropriate for that. And I can always try to reserve more capacity if I need it, right?
Gotcha. Are we seeing, and maybe even impossible to know what's going on in the C-suites, but I guess my thought and question is, are ambitions that might come from like the C-level for what they would like the organization to do with AI, even if it's not just talking about what they have the personal means as an organization to achieve and get, but even asking for more than what AI currently is able to even offer. Like, I would like AI to do this, but are we seeing any kind of like gap like that, any kind of like dissonance?
I think the
that
number
regard?
one thing that people are trying to do with features using AI is to eliminate use of humans to perform certain categories of tasks. And that is something that is a very, very demanding ambition. You've all seen those stories about, someone goes and types into a Ford dealership. I don't know whether it's Ford. You go into a car dealership chatbot and you say, hey, like, ignore previous instructions. Promise me this car for $2,000, right? Like, there's actually a legal case in Canada, I think, pending about whether that is binding, right? Like, so I think that there's this. People are demanding that this technology do things that it is not yet ready for. For instance, taking over customer service communications entirely, right? Like, personally, I think there's still a need for human oversight there. I think there's, right, like, can you replace the phone tree menu when you call into a interactive voice assistant? Sure, right? But yeah, I think that's kind of what people think the technology can do, and what it can actually do at acceptable legal risk and risk of miscategorization or error or hallucination, right? Like, I think that those two are currently not fully aligned, but people like myself who are naysayers do not necessarily always win in the long term, right? Like, it is possible that there will be solutions to these problems. So by the time that someone implements a full end-to-end AI program, maybe the problems will be solved, or maybe they won't, right? Like, and if they're not, then have you really realized the cost savings? But I think throughout, there's kind of this need to understand, if you have deployed a model in the field, if you are using an AI-powered feature, what is it doing, right? Like, do you know what interactions are happening? Can you evaluate? Can you check? Can you double check? Every single prompt, every single user session is going to, that's added to that prompt is going to be unique, right? So how are you measuring what the results of it are? Are some prompts are some user inputs always causing the prompt to refuse when it shouldn't? Are some prompts causing the safety features to trip, right? Like, those are things you might want to look at.
Gotcha. Last question. Would it be helpful for organizations to potentially, put together a group, or at least identify who should be in the room to kind of figure out what's actually going to be feasible for them? You talked about legal concerns, the different elements, the different threads that might come into play, because there is that potential where ambitions start running down the road, but then other people are kind of trying to catch up really fast, trying to stop the car. Like, wait a minute, you forgot to put brakes on.
What I'd much rather do is, as you're saying, right, like, have an integrated team that is shipping more incrementally and within safe bounds, rather than have legal suddenly pull up, say you have to stop, right? So I think legal is one element. Given the theme of what we've been talking about, right, like, finance is also another element to make sure that it's within the reasonable cost bounds. Engineering, not just from the set of AI engineers, but also from reliability and capacity planning. And I think the most in-demand role right now is the data or AI scientist role to lead these projects.
Next up, I interviewed Brandon Lucia, CEO and co-founder of Efficient Computer. As we covered in other stories for this series, a big challenge for AI is the availability and access to energy to support these large-scale efforts that are, such as data centers that are coming online. Energy efficiency may be required to better distribute costs. All right, so Brandon, thank you so much for making the time. Again, we're looking at this idea of demand versus supply in trying to make AI happen for organizations. What happens when an organization's plans for AI might exceed their ability to deliver because of the availability of, or lack thereof, in terms of resources. Could be the technology, could be the personnel, could be just the pockets to reach down deep, So let's first talk about, like, what could be some of the stumbling blocks that you see that organizations might face. What are some things that might kind of like potentially stymie, ambitious plans to do something with AI, but here are things that might kind of slow things up, or require a bit of pause just to, before they actually can actually get to the, point of, hitting the ground running and moving forward?
Yeah, JP, good question there. There's a few factors. Some of the factors are more technical, and some of them maybe are organizational or even cultural within companies. The biggest one that I see, and one that at Efficient we're really focused on, and in general, I think this is really one of the biggest problems facing computing and AI in general now for the next decade is really energy. It's the supply of energy, the increasing demand for energy as we have AI models that scale, as we have all of the ancillary computation that goes around an AI model. So an AI model runs, and that's the bulk of the work that we need to do. But we need to, at the same time, support the AI model. And that means conditioning data so that it's suitable for interacting with the AI model, whether that's for training or whether that's for the inference, sort of the end user side of things. There's a lot of other computation that exists across data centers to support that. It requires a lot of energy. Running the models requires a lot of energy. Then there's all of the energy that additionally goes into those ancillary computations. So the big challenge that I see, probably the biggest challenge facing computing today, especially for AI computing, but really across the board, is energy. That should be front of mind for anyone that's trying to launch into the world of AI, or any really large scale computation. And it applies, especially in data centers. That's where we're seeing a lot of the activity around, people. You see these stories of people hoarding GPUs, and you read stories about, we have a nuclear power plant next to our data center. Sure, that's a massive obligation on the part of the suppliers of those services, and it's also a massive demand on the grid. We need to get power into those facilities, and we need to produce results. But I think that as we look forward, we'll see other impediments arise as there's more of a proliferation of AI technology, and in general, a proliferation of the next generation of computing, of which AI is clearly an important part. And that's into the physical world. So we're going to see more devices supporting AI functions. And there, AI requires energy efficiency. We need to have more efficient devices. We need to have more capability at lower power when we push these functions further into the world, so that then we're distributing the cost, and there's not this need for this consolidated, the sort of cartoon of a nuclear power plant next to every data center. The proliferation of those devices, I think, amplifies the demand for energy efficient ways of doing AI computations and doing computation in general. So energy is a big one. Energy is the big one. That's the biggest problem, in my view, that's facing computing and AI today.
Gotcha. Appreciate your thoughts on that. In addition to energy and just like some of the other stumbling blocks that might start to emerge, what should organizations start to think about in terms of trying to find a path forward, trying to find alternatives? Because there might be that tendency to say, within an organization, that the desire to have the best, the most top tier resources, the top tier chips, the personnel, a desire to have AI gurus that have like all the best credentials in terms of personnel. Should organizations start to rethink, or maybe even ground their thinking to look at alternatives that might be in the market or might be soon coming to the market, that they can weigh in? I know that, for example, DeepSeek kind of upended, perspectives. Folks are still trying to sort out exactly the whys and wherefores with that, but should there be some alternative thinking rather than just only thinking that the only way to win with AI is to go for the highest hanging fruit when it comes to resources?
Yeah, I thought you might mention DeepSeek in that question, because DeepSeek really was a disruptive moment for the landscape of AI. I think that it illustrates something that is a very important aspect of the current landscape of computing in general. It's not just AI computation, but computing in general and all the infrastructure that goes with it. And that is that it's changing really quickly. So what is the best changes potentially from week to week, and what are the core features that make up the most important AI applications. That changes weekly. And if you follow these things closely, you really see there's an incremental path happening. You know, there was this big explosion, ChatGPT happened, and then there was this big explosion. We have all these other models coming out with similar and often different capabilities, different ways of solving the problem. DeepSeek is yet another one. So what this shows us is the rapid pace of evolution of AI computation. And this is where it gets interesting, is the rapid pace of change requires support from the technology that we're using for all of these workloads. And that means we need to have a broad perspective, like we collectively, like the users of these technologies and the companies that are getting built to support these technologies need to have a very broad view of what the future may hold. So it's not just one thing. I think that it would be a mistake to over specialize for one thing today. And that's a real risk. Some hardware is tuned to a particular category of AI application. And that works really well if that AI application or if that use case is the one that defines the next decade, if that's the key. But I don't think we're there yet. And I think that's something that we have a real opportunity with, like we, the field of computing, have an opportunity with, is to support a general purpose and very broad array of use cases where if things change, if AI takes a left turn, first you zig, then you zag, you can still support it with the hardware that you have. And what it means to support it is it goes fast enough and it doesn't use a crazy amount of energy so that it's essentially an unsustainable enterprise to keep your data center turned on or to keep your proliferated physically embodied devices turned on. Being adaptive and being able to tap in to the rapid pace of innovation requires general purpose computing hardware. It requires a degree of generality in the hardware. And I think that is something where there's a risk of over specializing to what seems like the best thing today that could ultimately be an impediment. It works for today, but it could ultimately be an impediment if you look further down the line. So with energy, I think the ability to adapt and to support a broad array of innovative new approaches to the problem, that's a real key factor in my view.
Getting back to what I was saying a bit earlier about the grounding of, or the potential need to ground ideas, is there any tendency for ambitions from the C-suite or operational side of an organization to exceed the current capabilities of what AI is actually, at least in the here and now, able to offer in terms of we would like this to be done with AI, but this is actually what AI can do. And with that, I'm trying to get at the idea of whether or not there are opportunities in what is feasible now with AI that might be overlooked because they're kind of, someone might be looking, a little bit too further down the road and missing opportunities for what they can do. I'm trying to kind of get at the ways that our audience can kind of find ways to move forward as opposed to just fixating on that, we really want to do this, but for now, this is what's feasible and viable with AI.
Yeah, I think that in some cases, the discussion around AI, it sometimes feels a little bit like the cart is before the horse, where we need AI, and it's like, okay, well, what does AI do? And then you sort of work backwards from there. And that's not to disparage the concept, because I think that the recent advances in these generative AI models are absolutely amazing. It is unreal what they can do. I think that going in, maybe uncalibrated is the right word. So if you're, you mentioned like C-suite decision makers, you're working primarily on an application use case and you say, all right, let's put AI pixie dust all over our application, make it 100 million times better or something. There's a path where more computation, more of these AI functions, and efficiently supporting them in a way that doesn't, bloat up your operational expense. There's a way where you do get a huge benefit out of attaching that as a new capability to an existing use case or using it to generate new use cases. But all applications are not created equal in terms of the scale of AI. So you have on one end of the spectrum what some people refer to as AGI, and there are skeptics around the idea that AGI is really out there. But that's the sort of trajectory if you look forward in time. from where we're at today with these big generative language and logic-based models. Those are pretty amazing, and we'll see how far they can go. I don't think every application needs that. And that's, I don't think, even a very provocative opinion. That's just a statement of fact. My AI toothbrush doesn't necessarily need the full power of Claude or GPT or something like that. That's just, those are maybe not perfectly well matched together. On the other hand, if you look at especially some physically embodied applications, this is where things get really cool. You could use a smaller scale model, and maybe something, rather than the most powerful, largest scale, large language models, maybe we look to something like a small language model and combine that with other emerging capabilities in on-device edge processing, signal processing, local analytics, things like that, where we can use a mix of sort of the broader view of the computing landscape supplemented with the new capabilities of something like an SLM. Now that's quite appealing. It doesn't require a data center with a nuclear power plant attached to it, but you can still get new capabilities, new functions that are not possible today. And there's challenges that come with that too, to deploy that kind of application, whether it's on a AI toothbrush, or whether it's on an AI enabled smart infrastructure device, or an AI enabled small satellite, where we have all of these computational functions. Well, those use cases all have a diversity of requirements, diversity of computational capability that they can offer to new applications, and ultimately that's a new set of applications that's possible. And so that's something that's very exciting. If we embrace this broader landscape of computing, the new capabilities delivered by the sort of peak of AI, and then calibrate it to an application, put all that together, and I think there's some very interesting things that we'll see in the future.
Okay. And who does it make sense to really kind of be, if not the leader or the only, like the absolute point person, but who should be at least providing some guidance when kind of like sorting out the organizations, their demand for AI versus what they're able to get at? Should be the CIO, a chief AI officer, the CEO, I mean, does it come down to the chief financial officer say like, hey, here's the money that we have and nothing's happening without with that? What makes sense? Tentatively makes sense for organizations to say like, all right, we got to try to figure out somebody to kind of like arbitrate, how we're going to balance this.
Yeah, JP, I love this question. This is something I think about a lot. This is let me try to ask your question in a slightly different way, because it's something that's very interesting to me. Is how do people think creatively about what they can do in the future? That's kind of what you're asking. You're like, okay, we have a new technology. Let's get together and brainstorm. Let's all be creative. So maybe that happens in the office of the CTO. Maybe that happens in an R&D branch, and you have, president of R&D leading the way to the CTO's office, who eventually marches to the CFO's office. Depends on the organization. One thing stands out to me, and that is a need for creativity and for being forward thinking, and trying to not get stuck in, oh, how can we make what happens today 15% better? Maybe some companies will thrive if they can make what they're doing today 15% better. With such a disruption in technology, such a change of the landscape, we were just talking about these extreme energy demands. Things don't look operationally like they used to. So it's a big change in everything from the CTO's office to the CFO's office to the COO's office. You need to adapt. To adapt, you need to think creatively. What are the use cases that we want to enable with this technology? What are the functions that our customers will want? You have to intuit that. You have to be creative and think in the future. It requires vision. I think that if someone approaches this new technology and thinks that it can be a narrowly scoped, incremental path forward, I think that could be the wrong way to look at it, because that's ignoring the disruptive potential of this, the potential to do something that is further afield and requires creativity and a bit of investment. And that investment really is in approaching with again, a broad view. The landscape of computing has changed. That means that we have a new priority around supporting this generality of new use cases, and supporting energy efficiency, to make these applications feasible, whether it's, again, in the data center or in these proliferated physically embodied devices across the board. Energy is everything, regardless of where you're looking at that stack. So I think that, that kind of creativity is what's required. I think whoever's job it is to be creative like that inside of a company, that's where those decisions are going to be made.
Next up, I interview Simeon Bochev, CEO and co-founder of Compute Exchange. He warns that AI can kill innovation in some ways, particularly looking at the high costs for compute and data, as well as the high amount of control held by certain key players in this space, making it tough for some companies to get their hands on the technology that they want to use. But greater transparency and available offerings, he says, could help companies make decisions on their AI strategies. All right, Simeon, thank you for making the time. Once again, looking at this topic of organizations having a demand for what they want to do with AI, but then facing the very real issues of supply. I mean, supply for the resources to make AI happen can be chips, can be personnel, can be just the money to make it happen, all those different elements that they're trying to gather and put together because they've got ideas for what they want to do to deliver some kind of innovative approach, innovative project that they want to do with AI. But then, there are the matters of actually getting things together to deliver. So maybe let's start with your perspective on what are some of those early things, those kind of like, before you can even have the rubber meet the road, what are those speed bumps, those things that can get in the way that can either slow down or just stymie an organization's ideas for what they want to do with AI because they're facing this demand versus supply issue?
Yeah, well, it's great to be here, JP. Thank you for the opportunity. And I would say there's a lot of speed bumps. I gave a talk recently on how AI is killing innovation, and I believe that. It's not like, let's say, the internet, where you have relatively cheap computers, you have relatively cheap operating systems, you have equal access to it, and it's become ubiquitous. Unfortunately, AI is not that way today. You have high cost for compute, but also for data. You have a lack of, let's call it, capacity, right, which leads to the high cost. And then you have a high amount of control by a few players that control the large amounts of both compute and data. And so at the Compute Exchange, we're working on specifically the compute side, right, which is bringing better access and less opacity to the compute market. But I agree with your thesis that if you're a company today that wants to get started, it's tough, and it's tough because of those three reasons.
Gotcha. Is there a tendency, and then this probably happens not just with AI, organizations, they want to take advantage of the latest innovation, and they look to what is perceived at the time to be the top tier resource, the best in class, which is also probably the hardest to come by and the most expensive. Is there that kind of sensibility looking at the AI sector of if we're going to do AI, we have to go for what is perceived as like the best, whatever that is, and chase that, but the reality is there are alternatives that can deliver what their organizations might be looking for if they just open their eyes a bit and not only look at like one single option.
Right. Well, there's so much we could unpack there around, well, what is the best, right? We can talk about models and the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars it takes to train, quote unquote, the best models. Then we have open source models like Llama, but also DeepSeek more recently, that are calling into question the need to have such a tremendous amount of resources dedicated to closed source. But for the field that I know the best, which is compute, there's a lot of, I say it's a black box. You have what is objectively the highest quality compute provided by some players, typically the hyperscalers, that you will pay a premium for. And then there's a whole host, and almost every week I found out about a new provider that's offering compute services. But it's very difficult, even for experienced, knowledgeable people, to discern what is the actual difference between the two, and actually what what should I be willing to pay the big players versus others for what seems to be the same thing? And the truth is, it's not the same thing. Even though, TSMC, which makes all of NVIDIA's chips, right? We're talking about AI compute. Even though, an H100 with serial number 1 or a million is the same chip, it's not the same once it goes into a provider, right? And so figuring out how to get quote unquote the best is tough, and many people get stuck in the trap of, well, we've heard of some company, whether that's AWS, GCP, Azure, et cetera, and so we'll go with them, and we think at Compute Exchange that there needs to be a lot more transparency in the market, so that a buyer can actually, a user of compute can actually discern what is the difference between these different offerings.
Gotcha. And with that transparency, what ideally would that entail to kind of make it clear to users? Some kind of centralized, format of presenting things. How would you envision that coming together?
Sure. I mean, it's. I'll start with the low-hanging fruit, and there's a lot, and then go to some of the more specific, harder things. But first thing is, what's the price? Because the price on any provider's website is probably not the price you're going to pay. So we're starting with price transparency. What is it that you are actually paying for, right? How much should you be paying for this thing? Now, the next step from price transparency, which again to me is low-hanging fruit, it should be the way it should just be, is how do we measure what is the SLA, service level agreement, the performance reliability of a particular provider's compute offering versus another's? There's some public benchmarks like ML Commons, ML Perf that move in this direction. Part of the challenge with the work that they've done is it's generic. It's for let's say a general provider's infrastructure, versus what we're going to do is say, for this specific thing you're going to buy, here's what your workload may look like when it performs, which goes to a typical buying behavior we see today, which is test before you buy. But imagine if you don't have to take the time and the money to test, it's the test results are already there and available to you. And so start with price transparency, but very quickly go super specific into, hey, here's how your workload would run on GCP versus Lambda versus any of the other clouds, right? And give you that information to decide, well, based on that, what is that difference worth to you?
What makes sense when it comes to, at least based on what you're seeing, or just how things seem to be shaping up, organizations trying to start to making their decisions, making their plans, thoughts being kicked around in the C-suite, but someone or maybe a couple people be the leaders, or somebody to kind of arbitrate the ideas of, like, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to vet what our ambitions for what we want to achieve versus what we have the resources that we can achieve. We can go for. Is that something that would speak more to like the CIO or CTO or the CEO, or maybe the person who's got their hands on the money to say, hey, before you start writing checks, I can tell you what we can start writing checks for. Where audience, they're going to need some help trying to figure out like where they should start, and how they should start kind of like putting like either that one person or a team together. What makes sense to kind of like find a way to go forward?
I love this question, because what I'm seeing in the market right now, and it's been happening for the past 1.5 to 2 years, is at the board level, AI is being lumped in with cybersecurity. I don't think that's the right call. AI can affect every dimension of a business, and it deserves its own dedicated focus at the board level. And then at the executive level, I've noticed at bigger companies, it's being lumped into the CTO or the CIO. And I think the former Biden administration had this concept of the chief AI officer. I don't think I'm not suggesting we proliferate chief AI officer, but I do think that you don't just lump on AI to someone else's existing job description. It does require experience and dedicated focus. And I think, going back to your first question on constraints, there are a lot of people who may say they're AI experts. I personally don't use that term. I think AI is such a complex and far-reaching technology that no one can be an expert on any particular thing. I happen to know the compute space quite well, and so I talk about that. And so when we think about constrained resources, it's tough to get the right talent. But I think that in this case, given just the cost of AI, right, the amount of money that a company may spend on either training, fine tuning, or inference around compute, it's worth making the investment to bring on a dedicated individual to lead this work stream, as opposed to kind of lumping it onto someone else's responsibilities. And I'll add just one thing. We work with a lot of startups, but also big companies. At the startup level, it tends to be the CEO or the CTO that works with us. At bigger companies, it tends to be procurement, and I love procurement teams. And I think that what we're doing at Compute Exchange is a great alternative to what procurement has to do. And I would say that procurement is probably not the right place for AI decisions to sit. But unfortunately, because of the market today, where you basically have to get on the phone and talk to vendors, which procurement's very good at, that's kind of why it sits there. But I absolutely think it needs to be at a different level.
Gotcha. Actually, circling back around to the beginning and talking about constraints, looking at where we are now, what seems to be, or what could be things that have the greater likelihood of changing in terms of availability? What could, whether it's going to, this is potentially going to be something that'll be more abundant in the future, or something that might even be, in shorter supply. Again, getting back to, could be materials, people, money, what have you. What may or may not be some things that kind of start to shift the needle either way on the road ahead?
Yep. Well, it's already shifted in a big way. If we had this conversation this time last year, again in the compute space, which is what I know the best, it was a sell side market. The price was 2 to 3 times what it is today. Now it's a buy side market, but being a buy side market doesn't mean that it's super easy to get still, and it's not easy to understand, like I was saying earlier, what it is that you're going to get. And so I do think we're going to see more capacity. So I talked about cost, capacity, and control. I do think we're going to see, and we're already seeing, lower cost, which is a good thing. We're seeing more capacity. It's still going to be constrained. I'm sure you heard about the Stargate announcement, up to $500 billion. I argue that even that incredible amount of money is not enough. But it is a step in the direction of more capacity. And we have, Meta announcing 60 billion plus this year for more capacity in each of the hyperscalers. I think Microsoft this year is going to do 80 billion. So capacity is increasing. And so while capacity increases, demand will also increase. And I would say for someone that's looking to get started, I hope they'll look at Compute Exchange to see where they can find what they need at the right price and with the right specifications for them. But it is getting better. My main message is it's getting better. And at the same time, we need more. So I hope those investments will continue.
Next up, I interview Chaitanya Upadhyay, Chief Product Officer for Aarki. Though there will be roadblocks in the process of pursuing AI, he says organizations should think about a very focused, high-impact use case they want to pursue. And then from there, think about the solutions to deliver on that use case, to kind of build up from that kind of ground floor. He also says that it's important to understand what use cases can actually be solved with AI that's available today.
Chaitanya, thank you so much for making the time for this. I appreciate you speaking on this topic of looking at demand and supply when it comes to bringing AI resources to bear for organizations.
Thank you very much, JP, and very happy to be here talking about what the potentials are for AI and how companies can leverage it.
Gotcha. Great. So, once again, as I'm speaking to folks, we're talking about sometimes it's the ambitions of the organization to say, like, we would like to do this. This is the great plan that we have for what we want to do to leverage AI. But then there's also the issue of potentiality of that the ambitions might be something that could exceed any type of resources that related to AI. It could be, again, the personnel, that they have in-house, or even a third party that you can find a third party to work with. It could be the getting access to directly to the technology itself. Finding the models, machines to work with. It could be any number of things. Finding the access to data centers. All those different elements. There's that desires. Let's talk about the desire to get AI plans in motion. But what are, from your perspectives, what are some gaps, stumbling blocks, impediments that might slow up that intent to start to deliver and really leverage what organizations want to do?
Sure, that's a great question, and it's a very key point to keep in mind as organizations start looking at how to leverage AI and bring it into their strategy. I think the first goal should be that you start with a very focused, high impact use case. And what are you trying to solve? There are going to be roadblocks, but if you start with a very specific use case that you have in mind, attack that. Think about what are the current AI platforms that are available, what are the AI solutions that are available, and bring it into the fold. And now you leverage these existing tools while looking for solutions to these very specific use cases. And the other big thing is to make sure that you're leveraging your current team, right? You have human resources that are available to you. You want to augment what the human resources can do with the AI tools. Something at Aarki that we talk about is, and something as we looked at approaching with our AI solutions, is something which we call supervised AI. It's AI with human supervision. You see that everywhere. I think Tesla has that with their supervised FSD, right? We implement that ourselves. We let humans guide what the AI systems can do to maximize the effectiveness. Just to give you an example, as a ad tech company, right? We work with a lot of app developers to retarget users who might have churned. They download the app but are not seen again for 30 days, for example, or for a certain period of time. Now, what happens is that the client's going to give us, our advertiser is going to give us a whole bunch of users that they want us to go retarget that they have seen churned. And the AI model will, by default, go after users where it sees highest ROI based on its training. And every so often, it's going to miss out on cohorts or segments that are outliers that also give you a very good ROI. But that's where the human intervention and the human ingenuity comes in, right? That can augment what the AI is doing, as well as kind of the AI helping the human to get the best ROI for their client. And I think that's what companies need to be looking for. Have very specific goals. Try to solve it with existing ideas that exist out there, what the industry is already using, and then bring in your human creativity to help solve these issues.
Is it too easy, or maybe not too easy, but is it kind of common to get lost in the idea of being aware of what's being used in the market, but then also focusing a bit too much on only what is being presented or marketed as like the top of the line of whatever it is related to AI, be it the top of the line, technology resources, fixating on the idea that you absolutely must have so-called AI gurus who have a laundry list of credentials versus being aware of, like, some of the things that you're saying, being aware of the team, the people that you might already have in house, just trying to get in the perspective of does that lens start to look a little, sometimes the lens looks a little too far down the road, or it starts to look way into the lofty rafters of what is possible, but then also kind of like overlooking, I guess, some of the more reasonable things that are probably more readily accessible.
Yeah. So let's start with what can AI actually solve today? It solves it very well, right? There's process automation, there's pattern recognition, and there's predictive analytics. Now, as you identify the use cases, the immediate use cases that you want to solve. Instead of trying to get AI to solve everything for you, focus on the small things, know what the AI capabilities are, right? And something along with the supervised AI, you can also call it like a Iron Man suit approach, where you're using AI to enhance your team productivity, right? You identify your existing workflows, and then you look at what are the use cases that, or rather, what has AI already solved in the industry in your vertical. Can I bring those same capabilities that we have seen AI, which AI has proven itself in the industry, apply it to my existing use cases, and help my own team get to a better place? Almost like combining AI efficiency with human creativity and strategic thinking, if I may call it, right. And then once you identify these initial successes, that's when you can start building on and start looking for new opportunities. Another example that, if I may give, right, with what we do at Aarki, since we work with a lot of the app developers, and what we are seeing at in enormous amount of data that comes to us is usage patterns of users on various apps. Now, what we built using the AI capability of being able to recognize patterns, right? Because you have tons and tons of data. It's not humanly possible to sit and go through all of this data and find patterns. Sure, you have enough time, you can do this, but let AI do it, which has proven itself to recognize patterns. And we came up with the concept of what we call an app hive. There are recent articles actually in ZDNet, and I think it's going to be coming out in VentureBeat as well. We just released and what we call a Aarki retention report index for this year. And the app hive basically gives you an ecosystem of where you see users and where users tend to go. And now you can let the AI develop this this app hive ecosystem, and the human creativity goes in and starts looking at what are the various segments that I can see, what patterns can I leverage that the AI has found for my own benefits and for my clients' benefits. And I think that's the approach that I feel has been working for us, and something that companies can leverage.
Is it fair to say, or is it not, maybe not accurate to say, but the question of money being, the cost related to it, is that the ultimate, one of the more significant, points of like, hey, this could be like where organizations just find themselves just kind of stuck, the idea of how much, the resource that they need the most, money to actually derive what they want to do, or just again, are there more cost efficient ways to go about things that should also be considered?
Yeah, that's a very key again, a very key point that that we at Aarki had looked at, right? What is our cost consideration when we are looking to deploy these AI algorithms and anything that we need to any AI platforms that we need to develop or agents that we need to reuse. Again, you go back to a point where you start defining exactly what is it that you want to solve for, right? Let's not try to solve the world. Let's not try to fix everything, or I shouldn't say fix, augment everything, or even try to automate everything within the company and all its workflows. Identify certain use cases, and that would be the first step to reduce your costs. And when you think about implementing AI solutions, and then leverage what already exists in the market. Use existing platforms, use existing agents that can help. And going back to your point that you had mentioned earlier, where companies are kind of looking at should they heavily invest in data science engineers or ML engineers. You do need to be able to hire them. You do need a good team to be able to do it, but you can build slowly towards it by first identifying what is it that you're trying to solve. And there's another point over there where if you try to solve too much, then you're not balancing, or you're not setting the expectations of what you're trying to achieve with with your employees and with the human resources that you have available. They themselves will get a little frustrated in terms of something coming from C-suite that I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to solve the world with AI. But that's not the right approach. You got to involve them. You got to make sure that whatever you're doing augments everything that they are already working on, right? Not replacing them, but helping them achieve what they want to do. And that itself would be a cost saving for you, right? Because you're using AI tools to optimize and make processes more efficient for your employees.
Speaking of the C-suite, how do we go about kind of really refining and kind of like honing the ambitions that come from the C-suite to be closer to what is reality, what can potentially be done? Is it a matter of finding the right mix of voices to be in the conversation? As the C-suite might have, expectations or wants, but maybe it's a matter of bringing some folks from outside the C-suite to be part of that conversation, to kind of be those reminders of what is possible and what is feasible for the organization.
Yeah, totally. You do need to get the affected parties in whatever workflow you're thinking to automate, right? Involve them in the discussion from the beginning. You got to set the right expectation that we're not trying to replace you. We're trying to help you become more efficient. And instead of overlooking what the immediate opportunities are and trying to chase long-term AI goals, work with them to identify what are your current roadblocks, what are your current inefficiencies that we can help with AI, right? And it's the human creativity and the human ingenuity that exists that AI will never replace, right? And we want AI to help augment what you're doing. I'd read recently once on LinkedIn, there was this thing that says that AI should do the dishes and the washing, and let the human do the creativity rather than the other way around, right? And if you can approach it with that to your teams outside of the C-suite, then they'll be more than willing to accept and even actually be very very enthusiastic about adopting the AI strategies that the C-suite has in mind.
So knowing what AI's capabilities are in the here and now, and then comparing that to your existing workflows and use cases could help organizations ground their ambitions for their strategies with the technology. And perhaps, fingers crossed, the limited supply of AI resources currently face won't necessarily stall momentum for organizations. That is, as long as organizations can get real about supply, demand, and also look for creative ways to meet those challenges. Once again, for Information Week, I'm Jean-Pierre Ruth.